All right, so while they leave, I want to ask you guys a question. If I was going to visit a city in the United States that's going to offer world-class museums as well as monuments and memorials, which city would you direct me to?
Washington, D.C.
Second to none, right? When it comes to like world-class museums, it's kind of fun. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it may cost you a little bit of money to get there. You may have to like hotels, but once you're there, like everything else is free. Like most of the museums are completely free, which is pretty incredible. If you've not been there, quick show of hands, how many of you have ever visited Washington, D.C. before? Okay, quite a few of you. So if you haven't, there are a few places that you could visit, such as the National History Museum. This is a fun one. I personally really enjoy the Rock and Jim exhibit. Do we have anyone else? Yes, it's just so fun. I really enjoy it. Another place that you could visit is the Air and Space Museum. How many of you guys are like, that's where I'd go? Definitely. Yep. I knew Tony would. The scale at which they do things is just really, really incredible. So the American History Museum, this is one of my favorites. And I thought I'd pick one of my favorite pieces in the museum. And because I'm silly, like this is seriously one of my favorite. How many of you guys Seinfeld fans and recognize the puffy shirt? It exists in the National History Museum. So random. When I saw it, I just couldn't help but laugh. And so it has soon become one of my favorite pieces. But you can see the shirt. I don't want to be a pirate, right? Remember? Okay. You could also visit the World War II Memorial. This is one of those that if you have grandparents or you had parents who fought in the war, there's just something really special about this one. I also enjoy finding Easter eggs, and there is a really cool Easter egg that you may or may not know about. How many of you know about Kilroy? Okay, so Kilroy actually is etched on granite somewhere on the World War II Memorial. How many of you have actually found Kilroy before? It's fun when you do. And some of you are like, I don't even know who Kilroy is. Look into World War II history. He shows up and he's been around ever since. All right, you could also visit the Lincoln Memorial. This is just one of those places you just have to go. A couple of pro tips though, because I've visited multiple times, I've learned a few things. One, don't touch Mr. Lincoln. You'll get yelled at, okay? That did happen to somebody in our family. It may have been me, but don't touch Mr. Lincoln. However, I would say, and I don't think you're going to get yelled at for this one. I did it and did not get yelled at. My kids participated in this and did not get yelled at. So I would highly recommend taking advantage of the Lincoln Memorial slide. There's a slide, guys. And the slide is right there where the arrow is. Just off of the stairs is a really cool slide. And you can play on that all day long. In fact, we've got video of someone playing on that slide. That guy's so cool. I don't even know who he is. That guy's amazing. Yeah. You could also go to the White House, actually. How many of you, when you were in D.C., were able to visit the White House? One of the things that you just need to know, though, is you're only allowed into the East Wing, which is fun, but it kind of gives the vibe of, maybe a friend invites you over, but you're only allowed to hang out in the unfinished basement, right? It kind of has that vibe to it. Air hockey is cool. Like, I like playing air hockey, but what about watching the game on the big screen? Like, that's kind of what I want to do in the living room. So it kind of has one of those vibes. You could also visit the Botanical Gardens. How many of you were able to visit the Botanical Gardens? So not on my radar either. In fact, the last time we visited, the only reason it was on my wife's radar was because at the time they were saying that the corpse flower was going to be in bloom. And this is neat because it only blooms every 7 to 9 years. And so we're like, oh man, is it going to bloom? Is it going to bloom? And unfortunately, it did not bloom, which meant that we're going to have to wait another 5 to 7 years until we get to smell this really wonderful flower that gets its name from rotting corpse. So shucks, we missed that one. Hopefully next time. I love visiting DC. Like I said, I've done it multiple times. And one of the things that hits me every single time, and it does so when I least expect it, is I just get this overwhelming sense of patriotism. And this is coming from someone who, to be honest with you, is kind of not always so patriotic. Like almost embarrassingly, I don't want to admit that sometimes I'm just not very patriotic, but there's this moment, like every single time I visited, where I'll just feel so proud to be an American. Or at least I know I'm free. and I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right. And I'll stop. All right. So I don't know, how many of you visiting DC, there's just like, maybe you almost get weepy, just like, anyone know what I'm talking about? It just comes over you when you least expect it. Now there is a museum that you can go to that it's really understated. It's understated, but maybe when it comes to our identity as Americans, probably the most important museum that really exists in the mall, or at least in that area, and that is the National Archives. Which of course, we're like, yeah, totally, gotta visit the National Archives. But it's pretty neat, because there are some really important documents in the National Archives. Any idea what those documents are? So we got the Declaration of Independence. Those of you who maybe watched the Nicolas Cage movie where there was a treasure map on the back, you probably are aware of that, right? And there's also the Constitution also exists in the Rotunda, which is what you're looking at right there. I don't know if you are familiar with, you guys all learned it in school, but sometimes we don't retain very well. But when the Constitution was ratified, we had these group of founders who decided, you know what, it's really important for us to make some amendments right away. And so they made 10 amendments that we refer to as the Bill of Rights. That's also in the Rotunda. And with Independence Day tomorrow, I thought it might be fun. Some of you may be like, yeah, this just makes me feel like I'm back in school. But I thought what we do is we just review what some of your rights are when it comes to the Bill of Rights. So first one that we all know about is you have the right of freedom of speech. I can stand up here and I can pretty much say what I think needs to be said, and I have never been worried once that some government official is going to come in and arrest me. I've been a little worried that some of you may hate me after whatever I say, but I'm not worried about getting arrested because I have freedoms, and those freedoms are protected by the Bill of Rights. We've got the freedom of the press. The press has the right to kind of write what they think is important. Assembly, we're sort of taking advantage of that actually right now. Certainly we're taking advantage of this next one, which is religion. Next we have bear arms. How many of you guys excited about, not here in Kentucky, none of you care about this one, right? Like we can just cross this one off. None of you get excited about being able to have firearms here in Kentucky. We also have the right of due process. Means if someone wants to throw you in prison, they may want to, but they can't. You've got to go through the right judicial system, which also includes this next one, trial by jury. Another right that we have is search and seizure, meaning we can't just immediately have our stuff taken from us. Cruel and unusual punishment. It's not that people can perform cruel and unusual punishment to you. It means they can't. It means they can't torture you, which is really great. And the last one, man, this one's so important. Soldiers. Soldiers can't hang out in your home. They cannot commandeer your master bedroom and say, this is our barracks. Sorry, get out of here. Which, whew, man, thank goodness that isn't allowed to happen. Now, when we look at these, certainly we are enjoying these rights even right now as a people. But at the same time, when you think about what our founding fathers were doing, the framers, they were really intelligent people. I know it's raining. Everyone's really excited. Oh my goodness. Should we praise God for that? Let's do it. Praise God for the rain. All of our farmers are like, I gotta get to the crops. All right. So back to the framers. This is more fun than rain, right? So they were smart individuals who knew that times were going to shift and change, and at the same time, things would have to get amended probably further. And so they came up with what is referred to as the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment, I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. I'm sure you guys all have it memorized, but the Ninth Amendment says this: the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other, and that word others is not referring to other people, it's actually referring to rights, others retained by the people. What in the world does that mean? It means that they gave you some rights, they listed some rights, but that's certainly not all of the rights. There's others that you can also enjoy, and although it's not written down, they're there. I think maybe a 21st century variant on this would be, well, you have the right to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, with whoever you want to do it, as long as it doesn't, actually interfere with other people's Ninth Amendment rights. This is kind of how we live our lives, don't we? Or at least a lot of people in the United States live their lives this way. Like, I have the right to do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, with whoever I want to do it with, as long as it's not anything too crazy. But there's a problem with that. And if you're a parent, you kind of already know the problem with this. Because when you give a child rights and privileges, and you don't couple them with responsibility, some scary things can take place. How many of you have you've ever lost your door before? Like, you lost your bedroom door? Has anyone lost a bedroom door before? Okay, a couple of you have. So several years ago, I was working with a student, and she lost her bedroom door. And it's not because she woke up in the middle of the night and was just like panicked. Oh my gosh, like, what happened to the bedroom door? Oh my goodness. Like, she knew what happened to her bedroom door. Her dad took the bedroom door. Now, she was furious, and she was talking with me and my wife, and she was explaining the injustice of it. Why? Because, we know. Just think about the people who should have a right to a bedroom door. Like, pretty high on the list would be like teenage girls. Like, teenage girls should have the right to privacy and a bedroom door. But see, what happened was, yeah, she had that right, and her parents gave her that right, but it was also coupled with responsibility. And she had a very clear responsibility to keep a level and cool head when there was conflict in the family. They said, hey, you have a responsibility not to run out of the room, up the stairs, yelling and screaming, and then slamming your door, isolating yourself from everyone else. And you can guess what happened one too many times. And so what did Dad do? He just picked those little pins right off the door and said, sorry, you no longer have the rights to a bedroom door. What do we know? We know that if you are given rights and they're not coupled with responsibility, bad things can happen. We know that it works so well in a company, it works so well in a family, it works so well even in a church, certainly in a nation, when, yes, you have rights, but they're coupled with responsibility. And so today we're going to be talking about this a bit. And I think one of the questions that may even be surfacing in your mind, and I kind of hope it's surfacing in your mind, is, all right, well, it's great to have a Bill of Rights, but if it needs to be coupled with responsibility, then why isn't there a Bill of Responsibility? Good question. And it can be answered, at least in part, with the understanding that those who actually wrote the Constitution, made those amendments, the Bill of Rights, they were working with certain assumptions. There were certain assumptions that they just held. They understood that there was a moral path that would be able to direct our personal responsibilities. And I want to just, again, anything I'm sharing with you, any credible historian would say, yeah, no, that was definitely an assumption that they had. And so I want to share with you just a few of the assumptions that they had having to do with this morality, having to do with this path that would also couple not just rights, but also responsibility. So one of the specific assumptions that they had was the consensus of conscience. Consensus of conscience. What does that mean? It means that they understood that most people, particularly in that time, late 1700s, they understood that there were certain things that were right and certain things were wrong. And certainly there was probably gray areas, but for the most part, there was an assumption that certain things were wrong and you just don't do those things. And certain things are absolutely right. Feel free to do them. And they assumed that certain things were that way. Another assumption that they had was something called divine accountability. Again, they don't use that word, but you can certainly see it not only in the documents that are our founding documents, but also in the letter writing that they made, speeches that they made. What is divine accountability? The framers were individuals who had just participated in a war of independence. And when you look at the forces of the British Army and the help that certainly America was getting from the French, but it was one of those David and Goliath things. And there was this recognition that, okay, God clearly was helping us here. There's no way we would have been able to do this without God. And as we're now forming this country, we're accountable to that Creator. There's a sense of accountability to this God who is allowing them to form a country. And there was that assumption that there was that divine accountability. Number three assumption was the individual expression was governed by concern for other individuals. So we've already established we all have a Bill of Rights. You have rights. I have rights. You have rights over here. You have rights here. And you guys all have rights. There's an assumption, though, that as we're exercising, there's this understanding that as you exercise your rights, you exercise them in such a way of actually being courteous, actually making sure that you're expressing them in a way that you're actually concerned for the other people around you? And these were assumptions that were made, and we see them all throughout the literature. I think most evident, probably the best example is in the Declaration of Independence. Particularly that second paragraph that I know all of you have at least heard, some of you have probably even memorized. Let's go ahead and read this first part. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And we've all heard those words, but what does it mean to be self-evident? It means by the time you're finished reading this, you're going to look at each other and be like, yeah, duh. Yeah, it's obvious. Like that's what's right. So they knew people were going to look at each other after reading what? After reading this, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. You have rights, and I have rights. But where did those rights come from? Was it from the government? Where did you get your rights? Where did you get your freedoms? They came from your Creator. They came from God. See how they're coupling both the ideas of God as well as your rights? There's this accountability to this Creator. It continues. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government did not establish these rights. The government did not say you have these freedoms. No, these were actually coming from your Creator. And so we have this right there in our Declaration of Independence. We also see them actually in some documents that John Adams wrote. John Adams was the second president of the United States. He was the vice president of George Washington. Pretty important guy when it came to all of these documents and the founding of our country. And I want to read to you what he says about this. Again, what you're going to see is you're going to see this idea of morality. What you're going to see is this idea of a Creator, and that, yes, although you have rights, they need to be coupled with morality and this connection and accountability with the Creator. And I chose, just so you know, I chose John Adams because he's one of those individuals who, unlike some of the other framers, he believed what he was writing, but he also backed it up with action. And I think sometimes we can look at some of the founders and say, yeah, I'm sure you believed it, but oftentimes you compromised. John Adams did not compromise. John Adams was against slavery. John Adams fought against slavery and never owned a slave. And so what does he have to say? It says, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. So what's the assumption there? The assumption was that we would be moral. The assumption was that we would have this accountability to a Creator. He goes on, it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. He says, if we're going to make this thing work, this system of government that really is just kind of an experiment, if this thing's going to work, well, then we have to make sure that we continue to have this morality. We continue to have this accountability to God. That yes, you have rights, but you also have responsibility, and they need to be coupled together. All right, let me switch gears for just a moment. How many laws do you think exist in the United States? How many laws do you think we have? Do you think we have hundreds? Thousands? Tens of thousands? No, I don't know about tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands? Anyone want to go for millions? Okay, some people think millions. All right, so I'm going to give you the answer, and as I give you the answer, I'm just setting you up here. You're not going to like the answer. You're not going to like the answer because it's going to disturb you a little bit. And maybe it won't disturb you, but it certainly disturbed me when I was like, what? And here's the answer. The answer is we don't know. We don't know how many laws govern our nation. Now, why is that the case? That's crazy. Like, we know how to count. Why can't we just count and figure out how many laws? Well, let me explain some of the things you might need to know. There's something referred to as the statutes at large. Statutes at large. This is a list of documents or a collection of documents. These are all of the laws that were passed by Congress. So these are all federal laws. And there are 64 volumes. And when I say volumes, I'm talking about gigantic, dictionary-style volumes. And there's 64 of them. There's actually probably more. But I was only able to track them in my research up to 1951. Why I couldn't find any more after 1951, I don't know. I looked and I looked and I looked and I finally was like wasting time. I was like, whatever. 64 is enough for this illustration. So there's 64 of these volumes, at least. There's probably many more. And In order to count, you would simply think that you have to read a page and count how many, and then you count the next page, and yes, tedious and super annoying, but doable, right? It's more complicated than that, because as you read one volume, the next volume actually might have a law to repeal an old law. Or maybe you read one that actually, makes the other one null and void. And so there's really a hard, what's real? I mean, no one's figured it out. And this is 64 volumes that don't even include the non-federal laws. We have things like case law. We have things like the regulatory provisions. That's not even counting those. However, in 1982, the Justice Department at least tried to set some time aside to count how many criminal laws were out there. And so they spent 2 years, the Justice Department spent 2 long years trying to count all of these laws. And by the end of those 2 years, a guy by the name of Ronald Gaynor, who was heading up the project, had this to say. He says, "You will have died and been resurrected 3 times and still not have an answer to the question. We don't know how many laws are out there," which is a little disturbing to me. I don't know if it's disturbing to you or not. Some of you are just like, well, what does this have to do with rights and responsibility? Well, let me ask you, what happens? What happens when your rights, because you have them, collide with my rights? Because I also have them. What happens when your rights collide with my rights? Think about this. We have so many laws that we can't even count them. Why is this the case? Well, I think oftentimes it's because we're trying to stretch our rights as far as we possibly can. Right? We want what we want when we want it, and we want to be able to do it with whoever we want to do it with. And so we stretch our rights as far as possible, even though it actually might be to the detriment of other people. Right? These are those moments where we say, hey, this one's not included, so I can go ahead and do that. Hey, you didn't write this one just the right way, so I'm going to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it, even though it actually might hurt you. Oh, okay, yeah, no, I definitely committed the crime. I totally did. But see, I found this loophole, and I'm going to use this loophole, and yeah, I know, I totally committed the crime, but here's the deal. I win, you lose. You didn't write it just the right way. You didn't arrest me in just the right way. So this is what we're oftentimes doing. We stretch our rights as far as possible. How many of you have ever made a decision? Maybe you thought you were in a position of authority and you thought you were being just and you thought you were being fair. You were looking at both sides of the situation and you came to a decision and someone didn't like it. And so they threatened to sue you. Have you ever been threatened to be sued? Anyone? I've been threatened to be sued. In fact, I've actually been threatened quite often. Typically, that's when I was working with teenagers, and they were upset with me. Like, oh, my dad's a lawyer. I'm going to sue you. He'll totally sue you. I'm like, buddy, you're hurting kids in dodgeball. All I did was ask you to sit out around. I don't care, man. I'm going to sue you. So, what do you think? Do you think that maybe we have lost our way a little bit when it comes to what the founders had in mind when it came to your rights? Is it possible that maybe we've lost our way just a little bit when it came to God actually giving us these rights? Here's the sad reality, and maybe you'll walk away just a little bit more discouraged. I don't think we can go back in time and experience a late 17th century experience. Right? I think what the founders were doing, I don't think we can go back to that, where there's this deep sense of morality, this deep sense that certainly God exists and our lawmakers are making. I don't think we're going to go back to that, because when you look at the Justice Department, you look at the presidency, you look at all, we've been permanently decoupled from that reality. But I don't think we're doomed, and here's why. Currently, 60 to 70% of our population say they're Christian in some form or another. Now you can argue, well, that means something for some that probably doesn't mean it for others. You could argue that. But according to research, 60 to 70% of people in the United States are Christian. And so what if these Christians simply decided, you know what, with the conduct and the character of my life, I'm going to make a positive difference in this country? If we actually decided that just with our character and our conduct, we're going to make a positive impact, that's going to do more. That's going to do more to bring about positive change in our country than anyone that we elect. Any law that we try to get passed or get repealed. That if our character, if our actions actually look like Christ, that's going to do more to change the fabric and the texture of our country than anything else we can do. And you might listen to that and you might say, well, how do you know? Because Scripture tells us, guys. And we see it over and over again in Scripture. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and turn to Galatians chapter 5. Some of you are like, finally enough of the history lesson, right? Let's get into Scripture. It took me a little longer to get to Scripture today. I apologize that it has taken this long, but turn to Galatians chapter 5. And while you turn there, I want you to try to remember, some of you, you're going to have to really go back in time, but try to remember the moment that you were handed the keys to your first vehicle. You guys remember that? And I'm not talking about you got your driver's license, but it was coupled with all these restrictions, and you had to have that 25-year-old person in the car. I'm talking about, like, you had the keys to the car, you had the driver's license, and you could go wherever you wanted to go. You guys remember that? What was the overwhelming feeling that you had in that moment? Freedom. Someone said it. Who was it? It was freedom, right? That's what you felt. I'm free. I can do whatever I want. Go wherever I want. That was an amazing feeling. My first vehicle was a motorcycle, and I remember I bought it. I insured it. It was mine. I had the keys, and I looked down at the speedometer, and the speedometer said, like, the highest number was 90. Now, I knew the law said 65, but I just couldn't help but wonder, can this thing go 90? And I even noticed that there was space after the 90 before you got to that, like, stop point. It's like, I bet you this thing could go 100, right? Did you guys have similar experiences with your car? Yeah. What happens when you're given freedom? What do we do when we're actually handed rights? What we tend to do is we try to stretch those rights. We try to stretch those freedoms as far as we possibly can, even if it might be something hurtful to us or to other people. And so the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 5 says, wait, guys, you are given freedoms, but you are given these freedoms to steward them and to steward them well. How does he say it? Galatians chapter 5, let's look at verse 13. It says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. God has given you this freedom. But do not use your what? Your freedom to indulge the flesh, which sounds super weird. What does this mean? It means that Paul knows you. And the scary thing is, Paul also knows me. Paul knows that when I'm handed the keys to that motorcycle, he knows where I'm going to be tempted. He knows I'm already thinking, okay, so outside of town, there's this long stretch of highway, and I know there's no police officers ever there, and it's probably a pretty safe, like, I could probably could I bury the needle at 100? Like, he knows what I'm thinking. Like, when you're handed the keys, when you're handed freedom, he knows what you're going to be tempted to do. Just wait. You need to steward this freedom. See, he knows that when you are free to watch whatever you want on whatever device you have, because no one else is around to hold you accountable, you actually might start watching things that you would never watch if people were actually watching you. But as soon as you got that freedom, he knows where you're going to start moving. See, Paul knows me. He knows you. He knows that when cheating is foolproof. I mean, you didn't study, you didn't do the homework, and you know you can get away. He knows that you're going to stretch that as far as you possibly can. And when you're given the freedom to the refrigerator, he knows what you're going to do. He knows you're going to just want to stuff your face with all kinds of stuff that's not actually going to be healthy for you in the long term. Paul knows what we oftentimes move towards when we're given the keys of freedom. He says, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. What are we supposed to do? Serve others humbly in love. Imagine if the 60 to 70% of people who actually say that they're Christians here in the United States tomorrow just started serving each other humbly in love. Think about the impact that might actually make. And then in verse 14, he says something that we see throughout Scripture. It's something that was originally spoken given to Moses in the law, and then Jesus double downs on it as one of the most important things that you could possibly do on this planet. And now Paul circles back on it as well. Verse 14, he says, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." And so tomorrow is Independence Day. And some of you, you're going to wake up and you're not going to be groggy because you woke up later because you don't have work, and that's just going to feel good. And so you're going to stretch your arms and you're going to stretch your legs, and maybe you'll think, oh yeah, 4th of July, independence, freedom. Oh, thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus, for that freedom. And then you might move later in your day to cookouts and, who knows, some of you, you might pull out your pistols and just like fire off a few rounds because you got the right to bear arms, and you just bang, 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 right? Who knows what you're going to do? But what if we decided that we're going to wake up and we're going to reflect on our freedom, and we're going to say, all right, how am I going to leverage that freedom? How am I going to leverage the rights that I have that God has given me? Maybe I can leverage them to love people really, really well. Like all day long, I'm just going to do for others all day long what I would want them to do to me. And I'm going to live out the words of Jesus, who said, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you." And so tomorrow, you just wake up and you're saying, I'm going to love the old. And I'm going to do it in unique ways they're not even going to see coming. It's going to be amazing. And I'm going to love the very young. And maybe I'll even love those who are still being stitched together in their mother's womb. And maybe I'm going to love those in between so that they actually see that I'm not trying just to do whatever I want, whenever I want to do it, because I've been given these rights, but I'm actually holding responsibility to a God and Creator who has given me these rights. And maybe I'll love my girlfriend the way that I want my little sister's future boyfriend to love her. And maybe I'll love my wife the way that I want my daughter's future husband to love her. And maybe I'll love my husband the way I want my son's future spouse to love him. And maybe on Tuesday, when I walk in to my place of work, I will actually treat the people in the office the way I really wish I had been treated at that previous place of employment. And maybe I'll actually treat my boss with respect and honor, because when I'm the boss, I want to be treated with respect and honor. Imagine the texture. Imagine what would begin to change in our country if 60 to 70% of the population began to live that way. You probably wouldn't have to have a single law, would you? Because if we're living that law of just loving as Christ has loved us, well, things start to take care of themselves. Paul says, it's a different story, though, if you don't live this way. In verse 15, he says, if you decide not to live this way, what's going to happen? If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. This is that, hey, that's mine. Yeah, but I saw it first. Yeah, it doesn't matter, though, because I'm more important than you are. You may be more important, but I know more important people than you know. Yeah, well, I know a lawyer. How about that one? I'm going to lawyer up. Well, guess what? I'm going to get 2 lawyers. What happens when we live such a life? We become like dogs, biting, nipping, barking, devouring, and we will be destroyed. How will we be destroyed? We will be destroying each other. And so Paul says, how about this? How about you actually start to couple your rights, which you've been given, your freedoms that you've been given, with responsibility. To love and to love well, just the same way that Christ has loved you. I want to share with you just 3 action steps that you can take. One is a question that you can be asking yourself, and certainly asking of other people. The other are 2 statements that I think if we keep that in the forefront of our mind each and every day, just making these statements, we will become people who actually live this out and don't just talk about it. The first is a question. The question is, how can I help? Let's just start asking that question. Ask it of yourself. When you step into a situation, maybe you're new, maybe you've been there a lot of years. Just start asking the question, how can I help? How can I help? When you go home today, ask your kids, hey, how can I help? If you're a kid, go to your parents. You want to blow them away? Just look at your mom and dad and say, hey, how can I help? They're like, what? What happened to you, right? It was church. Church did it. It's like, well, we'll keep going back to that, right? Ask the question, how can I help when you enter the place of business on Tuesday? And I know this one's a tough one because particularly this week, you have a shorter week, don't you? And with a shorter week and still the same amount of responsibilities, you've got a long list of to-do items. And you need to get those things done. But what if you actually looked at your fellow employees and said, I think they might need help with that. Hey, how can I help you? Let's just practice. How about we all just say, how can I help together? You guys ready for this? Here we go, on two. 1, 2, how can I help? Was that disturbing? Some of you were like, oh man, that was like a cold shiver ran down my spine. It felt so awful. If it did, I understand because I'm a selfish person as well. But we have a very loving God who looked at our situation, and what did he ask? He said, how can I help? And the answer to that question was something that cost him his son, but he did it anyway. And so I think we can go into our workplaces and ask that question, can't we? The next is a statement that I think in our society, in our world, we just don't like to declare, and that is, I will take responsibility for that. We live in a society that doesn't want to take responsibility for like anything. Most of us, we want to distance ourselves from responsibility. So what would it look like if we just entered spaces where we said, I will take responsibility for that? Start maybe today. Start maybe today as you're walking out to the parking lot, maybe you're walking in the other areas, maybe downstairs. Maybe there's a piece of trash on the ground. Flex your muscle in this area and just ask, I will take responsibility for that. Just declare, I will take responsibility. It's not your trash. You didn't put it there. Someone else will certainly clean it up. That pastor, he's kind of neat. He'll probably clean it up. So I'll just let Pastor Jonathan clean it up. How about this? How about you say, I will take responsibility for that. And you pick it up and put it in the trash. Kind of crazy. Don't worry. Like, our place isn't like messy. I'm not trying to make a statement there about the messiness of our church, but I think that's one way that we can begin flexing our muscle. What about when in the area of finances? Maybe you had a tough month last month. And immediately, what do? We want to point the finger and blame, and we like to say, yeah, but it's those rising interest rates. That's why things are, upside down. And oh my goodness, if I had a landlord instead of a slumlord, well then maybe I'd like have a good living situation. And we love to point the fingers. What if we just said, I'm going to take responsibility. Last month, I spent more than I made, and now I'm kind of in a tough situation. But this month is going to be different. I'm going to take responsibility, and I'm going to spend less than I make. And maybe I'll get over this debt thing. What would happen if we as Christians just started living this way? Or maybe you go, again, into your home, and everyone's ducking and dodging the responsibility. No one wants it, not even the parents. They don't want to get close to that thing. You're going to work, everyone's ducking, dodging the responsibility, and you actually step up and say, yeah, it's going to cost me something, but I'll take responsibility for that. I mean, kids will be like, what? No, Mom, you always blame me for that. You're going to take responsibility? Oh, wow, what's gotten over Mom? You take responsibility for things at your work, people are going to do double take. What's gotten into her? What's gotten into him? What are you doing? You're taking a responsibility for actually behaving like Christ, who took responsibility for sin he did not actually commit. And we are living more like Christ when we take responsibility for things around us. Certainly the things that we are to take responsibility for, as well as even picking up trash. Another statement that you can make. I will honor God. Out of the three, this one's the most important. Why is this the most important? Because it's a catch-all, right? This is the Ninth Amendment. This is hey, just in case we forgot anything, don't forget to honor God. Everything you say, everything you do, you're asking yourself the question, what would be most honoring to God? And you know the answer to that question, don't you? Because it's self-evident. What would be most honoring to God is for you to give your heart completely to your Father, as opposed to all these other things that you keep giving your heart to. What would be most honoring to God would actually be to do to others what you want them to do to you, as opposed to just demanding your rights and your freedoms. What would be most honoring to God is actually to love those around you the way Christ has loved you. John Adams, again, the second president of the United States, he wrote you a letter. Don't know if you're aware of this, but he wrote you a letter. John Adams actually died 1826, which was the 4th of July, on the 4th of July, 1826. And he wrote you a letter that I want to read at least a portion to you. This is one that I think is very telling when it comes to the heart of those who founded our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. This is what he says. He says, "You will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom." He begins that letter with one word, though. Posterity. Posterity. What in the world does posterity mean? It means you. It means me. Posterity is, okay, there's a future generation that I don't know who they are and how they're going to look, but I'm hoping that they exist. So I'm going to write this letter to those people, those folks. And he says, you will never know how much this cost us. Yeah, you're going to read it in the history books. Certainly, you'll see some paintings, but you're never really going to know how it felt. You're never going to know the smells that we smelled. You're not going to know the fear and the anxiety that we had. You're not going to remember the hours and hours of arguing over how to wordsmith these documents just the right way. You're not going to know the toll that it took on our hearts, our minds, our souls. You're not going to know. And then he says this. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it. John Adams basically is saying, guys, if we don't continue to live lives, Christians, we don't continue to live lives of morality, if we don't continue to live as though we are accountable to a God who has given us and entrusted us with these freedoms, this thing called freedom, this thing called liberty will just start to devour liberty. Freedoms will start to devour liberty, and we will destroy ourselves. And so the question that I want you to ask yourself as you leave today is, if I have freedoms and I've been given rights, what am I going to do with these rights and with these freedoms? Am I going to try to stretch my freedoms, my rights, as far as I possibly can because I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and how I want to do it with whoever I want to do it? Or am I going to be able to stretch it the other way? Am I going to be able to ask that question and answer, okay, how can I love people the way Christ has loved me? How can I honor God the way God has honored me enough to even entrust me with these rights in the first place? Let's pray. Father, this is a special weekend that we as a nation are celebrating our freedom. But Father, we want to enter this special weekend recognizing that we serve a special God who has entrusted us with freedom, to steward it and to steward it well. And Father, I know that I'm just talking to a very small minority of Christians today, but I know that if we as a church decide to actually begin living this out in meaningful ways, the kingdom impact is going to be something we're not even going to be able to know. Father, we know that you give all kinds of illustrations in Scripture, that we plant a seed and we gain 100 times what we planted. Father, may we be people who trust you enough to be obedient to you and to see that harvest